The Caspian Explorer and more released today, but it has been in early access for a week, as usual. And if you follow my channel, you know how uncharacteristic it is of me to be so quiet, as I have not made a peep about the Caspian Explorer to date, despite most of our creators going out of their way to talk about that ship. The main reason why I have not made a peep about the Caspian Explorer was the fact that there was a game-breaking bug associated with it. Specifically, because it has even more optional internals than the Anaconda, the so-called funny hull math issue with regards to how resistances stack affected the Caspian in an even more broken and disproportionate way. Namely, the so-called funny hull Anaconda, that was primarily, I learned after initially talking about it, it was primarily being used to grief players by blowing them up inside of stations while tanking the station lasers for several minutes. That ship had, and still has, by the way, about 80,000 hull in terms of effective hit points against thermal damage. The Caspian, to give you a reference, in early access had 780,000. It's not a typo, and I have not misspoken. 780,000 thermal effective hull hit points, which would have allowed it to tank the station lasers for almost 20 minutes, or maybe even close to half an hour. They touted releasing the greatest large explorer ship in the game, but what they would have done had they released the ship in its state as it was in early access, they would have released the biggest station ganker griefing ship the game had ever seen. So after a number of strongly worded emails and conversations with FDEV privately behind the scenes, and sort of conversations also with existing creators that had early access to the ship, where we demonstrated specifically how this worked in early access, Frontier has made the decision, the right decision in my mind, to release the ship today, but without access to mirrored surface composite armor, which is the key module that enabled this math bug to manifest itself. It also has promised that the math stacking bug is something that will go through a balance pass over the course of the next week. So hopefully, and finally, after 5 years after it was initially reported, and several months after we spoke about it and had the relevant issue tracker voted all the way up to number 4 in terms of the most upvoted issue trackers on the issue tracker of FDEV, they are finally looking into the funny hull bug. And I guess I would also argue through the right lens, which is one of a balancing act. So hopefully they fix the math, which is just wrong. There's a mistake, there's an error in the resistance stacking math. But they also potentially somehow buff hull reinforcement packages and their hull boosts to make them somewhat more viable in PvP and PvE as opposed to shielded builds, which candidly, as of today, except for very specific things like anti-Sino combat, hull tanks are just not a thing in the game, save for the so-called funny hull builds, which exploit the resistance stacking math, which is, again, an error in the game. So we'll see what they come up in the course of the next week. If I may throw something in, you might also want to take a look at meta-alloy hull reinforcement packages, which are completely useless right now. Maybe you can give them 20% caustic resistance and make them somewhat useful for something, because that's another module that has basically no use and is completely out of balance with everything else. It's like one of those modules that is just out of whack with anything and everything in the game. So anyway, that is one, if not the main reason why I have not been talking about the Caspian, because I wanted to, for once, act in a somewhat more responsible way and see if we could get this issue to be prevented before it made it into production and be something that was accessible to the masses. And we did. Thankfully, again, this is something that isn't coming into production with public release of the Caspian, so that's good. We'll see what the fix that finally fixes the funny hull bug math is over the course of the next week. But all in all, I'm glad to see this this temporary sort of stopgap solution. Beyond that, The bug that they did fix, and which is probably the saddest thing with, at least in my opinion, with this release, is they fixed Glideskip. Everybody's favorite bug in the game that allowed players to skip the glide phase by just slamming into planets at full blast and position them right above the stations. Again, saving some time in a game that isn't exactly known for respecting your time. Let's be honest. Has been patched. It is no longer possible to glide skip. And that also demonstrates that when it affects your economic interest, specifically when it undermines one of the key selling features of a ship you're just selling right now, because let's remember that the Caspian is being sold as a ship that is better at glide than other ships. Obviously, if you're able to glide skip entirely, the whole point of a Caspian being better at glide is completely kind of undermined. So when it affects something that you're selling, you're demonstrating that you're very capable of fixing bugs, which is great. I wish that same energy and that same enthusiasm went into fixing some of the bugs we highlighted that don't entail selling a solution to a problem that you're fixing or creating, depending on the circumstances. But alas, that's just like random commentary around it. It was a bug. It was an exploit. It was the right thing to fix it. It's just somewhat, it does raise an eyebrow that it got such high priority to be fixed when it was a harmless bug that everybody enjoyed. And let's be candid, it was only fixed because it was seen as something that would influence the sales of the Caspian Explorer. So, I mean, fine, somewhat annoying, but overall fine. In other news, I am keeping a keen eye on the developments of the war around the Radicoida Unica plant in the HIP some number system, which has been evolving quite a bit after all the systems were rapidly, completely undermined into the ground. And everybody realized that in 2 weeks, the whole enclave would have been eliminated from Powerplay. Frontier realized that maybe it was a good idea to also introduce some incentives for reinforcement and make reinforcement also count with regards to the contribution to Powerplay in the enclave. So that has been changed, and now you can get contribution to the CG also by conducting reinforcement activities. I do think they're still somewhat unbalanced because the 35% bonus basically nets off with a 35% malus that is inherent with reinforcement activities. So that's a wash, whereas undermining activities still have a bonus. But at least somewhat now, it's somewhat more balanced in terms of like how the war will play out. Nevertheless, it's the kind of thing that feels like it's still very experimental, and I wouldn't be surprised if the overall mechanics of how the war rules play out changes in a significant fashion over the next several weeks. More interestingly, though, it's interesting to me to observe the forces at play and the relative balance of power. It's clear. It has been clear for a while, but it's ever more clear now that that things are unfolding in the main sort of like narrative-driven direction that FDEV is laying out. That the Imperial forces, together with the one ally that they have among independent forces, which is Eurogrom, have a significant numbers advantage. So the interesting question in the back of my mind is, what will the other forces do? Will the allies, the feds, and the other independent forces come together and work together to oppose the numerically superior Imperial forces, or not? Because if they don't come together, then honestly the overall outcome of this whole war is, I want to say, a foregone conclusion. However, if they do come together, then it'd be almost close to a fair matchup, and it would be a lot more interesting, in my opinion. So I'll be keeping a close eye on what's happening on the war. I am traveling for work, so everybody's asking me if I'm going to kill a Hydra with this new ship in the Caspian Explorer, to which I reply, first of all, Rayman Games has already done it in early access. He's a great pilot. He's demonstrated how that ship fights in AX. It's a very good ship for AX as far as large ship go. It's it's not an interesting fight. Like a combat kitted Caspian Explorer versus a Hydra would be too easy to be interesting. I might eventually, when I have time, which might actually not be in a couple of weeks even, as real life is taking me away from the game for some time. I might see if I can actually get an Explorer kitted Caspian, so a D-rated, maybe even with engine-focused power distributors, to fight a Hydra, and see if I can get the biggest jump range ship to ever kill a Hydra, and see if like a ship with somewhere between 80 and 90 light years of jump can take down a Hydra without really any kind of combat characteristics. Now that would be more interesting, but still, the ship is very good, and as a result, it's not all that interesting of a fight in my head. But you let me know in the comments what you'd like to see and how you think about that. Glory to mankind, according to Mechan out.